woman on the other end of the line was crying so hard she could barely speak. She had called the airline's customer service line by mistake, she said, and got transferred 3 times before reaching the lost baggage desk where Vivienne Harlow happened to be standing in for a colleague. She just needed someone to help her find her husband. His flight had landed 2 hours ago, and he hadn't come home. Vivienne took the woman's information gently, professionally, the way she had been trained. She entered the passenger name into the system. She looked at the screen. The name staring back at her was Owen Harlow, her husband. Her fingers went still on the keyboard. The woman on the phone was still talking, saying something about dinner getting cold and the kids asking where Daddy was. Vivienne heard the word kids and the room tilted slightly. She pressed her palm flat against the desk to steady herself. "Ma'am," she said, her voice completely level. "Let me transfer you to our passenger assistance team. They'll be able to help you right away." She transferred the call. She stood at the desk for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee mug, walked to the break room, set the mug down carefully on the counter, and stood there for a long time watching the parking lot through the narrow window. It was a Tuesday in March. The sky over Denver was the particular flat white of a storm that hasn't decided whether to come in yet. She had been married to Owen Harlow for 6 years. She had met him at a work conference in San Francisco 7 years ago now. She had been there representing her regional office, one of 300 people in a convention center ballroom, when the man beside her at the buffet line said, without looking up, "The shrimp is a trap. Go for the salmon." She had laughed because it was true. He had turned and smiled, and the smile reached all the way to the corners of his eyes. He had sandy hair, slight build, the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need a room to notice it. His name was Owen. He worked in logistics consulting. He said he traveled too much and ate too many airport meals and had recently decided to care more about the quality of food because, he said, "You spend 1/3 of your life eating, and I've wasted too much of it on bad shrimp." She laughed again. They talked through dinner and long after, standing near the exit while the ballroom emptied around them. He flew back to Denver. She flew back to Memphis. He called her 3 days later and asked if she had eaten anything good recently. She said yes, a sandwich, and he said that wasn't good enough. He was going to need a full report next time. She was smiling before she even understood she was doing it. 6 months of phone calls and visits and the particular electricity of something becoming real. Then Owen suggested Denver, and it made more sense than Memphis did, and she had a job offer already waiting, and so she moved. She had always been the kind of person who knew when something was worth rearranging her life for. They got married in the fall. Small ceremony in the mountains, her family flying in from Georgia, his from Ohio. Her sister Ray cried through the whole thing. Owen held Vivienne's hands at the altar and said his vows in a voice so steady and clear that several people told her afterward it was the most sincere thing they'd ever witnessed at a wedding. She believed them. She believed him. She worked customer relations for Meridian Airways, the kind of job that was invisible when it went right and very visible when it went wrong. She was good at it. She was good at staying calm when everything around her was not, at absorbing anxiety from other people and giving back something manageable in its place. Owen used to say she had the most unshakable nervous system he had ever encountered, and he meant it as a compliment, and she took it as one. They lived in a 2-story house near Washington Park. She planted tomatoes every spring, and he never let them die when she traveled for work. On Friday evenings, they drove to a particular Thai place on South Pearl Street and always ordered the same things. On Sunday mornings, he made coffee the way she liked it, which was a very specific and honestly unreasonable amount of detail, and he never once got it wrong. It was the kind of life that didn't look dramatic from the outside, but from the inside, it was exactly what she had always wanted. Ordinary and solid and quietly joyful. The first sign had been so small she almost didn't catch it. 8 months ago, Owen had started taking calls in the garage. She had noticed because the garage was where he kept his old record collection, and he hadn't gone out there with any regularity in years. She noticed because the first time it happened, she had walked out to ask him something, and he had turned away from her, shoulders rounding, voice dropping. When he came back inside, she had asked casually who that was. "Work," he said. New client, time zone issues. She'd let it go. He traveled often for work. That was normal. That had always been normal. But she began to notice in the months that followed that his travel didn't always align with what he told her. Not obviously. Not in any way she could point to directly. Just the small gaps that accumulate when you know someone well enough to hear the difference between what they're saying and what they mean. He called her from Portland on a Tuesday night, but the hotel he mentioned, when she looked it up out of curiosity, she would never quite be able to explain, didn't exist on the block he described. She closed the browser. She did not say anything. The night she stood in the break room of Meridian Airways staring at the parking lot, she was not panicking. She was assessing. The woman on the phone had called looking for Owen Harlow. Owen Harlow who had children. Owen Harlow whose dinner was getting cold. Vivienne and Owen did not have children. They had talked about it, set a timeline, pushed it back once when her father was ill and they needed financial breathing room. They were going to start trying this year. Owen had said just last month over dinner at the Thai place on South Pearl. I think we're ready, Viv. I really do. She thought about that sentence now, the specific weight of it, the way he had looked at her when he said it. She finished her coffee. She washed the mug. She went back to her desk and worked the remaining 2 hours of her shift with total precision. She thanked customers and resolved complaints and kept her voice even and warm, the way she always did. When her shift ended, she drove home a different route than usual. She wasn't sure why. She just did. Owen was in the kitchen when she got home. He had made pasta. He kissed her cheek and said the drive looked bad. Had she taken the highway? She said yes, even though she hadn't. She sat at the table and ate and asked him about his day and listened to his answers and looked at his face and thought, I am looking at a man I do not know. That night, after he fell asleep, she sat in the dark in the living room for a long time. She was a methodical person. She did not like to act on incomplete information. She needed to understand the full shape of what she was looking at before she decided what to do with it. She started slowly. Owen kept his laptop on the kitchen counter when he worked from home. She knew the password because they had never, not once in 6 years, had any reason to have secrets. She opened it on a Saturday morning when he was at the gym. She found nothing on the surface. His email looked ordinary. His calendar looked ordinary. But she was thorough. She checked the browser history, which he had cleared. And then she noticed a second browser, a different one she had never seen him use, minimized in the taskbar. She opened it. There was an email account she had never seen before, a name she didn't recognize, a variation of his middle name, nothing that would flag in a search. She sat with her hands in her lap for a moment. Then she opened it. The oldest messages were from 4 years ago. His name was in every one of them. His voice, the way he wrote, the particular half-formal, half-warm tone she recognized from his text to her. But the name he was writing to was Deanna. And the messages were not the messages of a man who had a passing acquaintance with this woman. They were the messages of a man who had built a life. She read for a long time. Deanna lived in Phoenix. They had met, from what she could piece together, at a conference Owen had attended the year after he and Vivienne were married. Within 6 months of that meeting, the tone of the emails shifted. By year 2, they were talking about the future, about being together properly, about what that would look like. By year 3, Deanna had written, in one message that Vivienne read twice and then a third time, Jude asked about you again this morning. I told him you'd be here for his birthday. Please don't let him down. He's already so attached. Jude. Vivienne sat very still. She went back through the messages, looking for ages, dates, anything specific. She found a photo attachment from 3 years ago, a birthday photo, a small boy with a cake, candles lit, Owen crouching beside him with his arm around the boy's shoulder, both of them grinning at the camera. Owen was wearing a blue shirt she recognized. She had bought him that shirt. She had given it to him for their 3rd anniversary. She closed the laptop. She walked to the kitchen sink and turned on the cold water and held her wrists under it. An old habit from stressful shifts, something that cleared her head when clarity was what she needed most. She thought about Owen at the Thai restaurant last month, telling her he thought they were ready. He looked her in the eyes when he said it. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She thought about a little boy named Jude who was attached to her husband. Jude, who had asked about him. Jude, who Owen promised would not be let down. She dried her hands. She sat down at the kitchen table. She took out a notepad and a pen, because she had always thought better on paper, and she began to write down what she knew, and what she needed to find out, and what she was going to do next. She had a colleague named Frances who had left Meridian 3 years ago to work in legal research. Vivienne called her that evening from the parking lot of a grocery store 2 neighborhoods away from her house, because she did not want to make this call inside her own home. "I need some help," she said, "and I need it to stay between us until I say otherwise." Frances said, "Tell me what you need." Within a week, they had found it. A rental in Tempe, Arizona, just outside Phoenix, in Owen's name. A lease that had been renewed twice. 2 names listed as residents. Deanna Marsh and 1 minor dependent, Jude Marsh, age 4. Vivienne looked at the number. 4 years old. Owen had been with her for 7 years. Married for 6. He and this woman had been in contact for 5. She did the math. She checked it twice. He had started a family during their marriage. Not before, not after, during. She called Frances back. "How do I find out if he's been filing taxes jointly with her?" Frances found out. He wasn't. He was too careful for that. But the financial picture that emerged over the following 2 weeks was enough. A second credit card, in a name she didn't recognize, tied to a P.O. box she now knew was in temp. Consistent transfers, not large, but regular, into an account she had never heard of. 7 years of small disappearances, adding up to a map of a life he had built in secret beside the one they shared. She thought about Deanna Marsh, about a woman in Phoenix who believed she was loved, who had a child with this man, who was raising that child, presumably, on the strength of his promises. She thought about the phone call at the airline, the woman who had been crying because dinner was getting cold and the kids were asking where Daddy was. She had said kids, plural. Vivienne called Frances. "Can you check for a second child?" Frances called back 2 days later, a daughter, 18 months old, Reese. Vivienne sat in her car in her own driveway and looked at the front door of the house where she lived with her husband. She thought about all the Sunday mornings, and the coffee made exactly right, and the Thai restaurant and the conversation at the altar, where he said his vows in a voice so clear that people commented on it afterward. She thought about Jude, who was 4 years old, and asked about his father. About Reese, who was 18 months and wouldn't remember any of this when she was older, which was either a mercy or a tragedy, and maybe both. She did not cry. She would cry later. She knew that. But right now she needed to think. She was a person who stayed calm in the disorder that undid other people. That had always been true. She was going to need it to be true now, more than ever. She decided, the way she decided most important things, quietly and without drama. She called a lawyer first, a woman named Harriet Oakes. Firm, fast, known in Denver for not losing. Vivienne had heard her name from a coworker 3 years ago, in the context of a divorce that had gone cleanly and fairly in a situation that could have gone badly. She had filed the name away without understanding why. She understood now. Harriet listened without interrupting. When Vivienne finished, there was a brief pause. "How much documentation do you have?" "Enough," Vivienne said. "And I can get more. Good. Don't touch anything yet. Don't tip him off. Give me 48 hours. The hardest part of those 48 hours was sitting across from Owen at dinner and talking about ordinary things. He made a comment about a neighbor's new car. He asked about her coworker's maternity leave. He poured her a second glass of wine and said she seemed tired, and she said long week, and he rubbed her shoulder briefly before clearing the plates. And she sat there and thought about a child named Jude, who was 4 years old, and a girl named Reese, who was 1, and about a woman in Phoenix who did not know that the man she loved had a wife in Denver. She thought about that a great deal, actually, about Deanna Marsh. It would have been simpler in some ways to feel rage toward her. It was the instinct, she knew, the easier story. But when she thought about what she had read in those emails, about the way Deanna wrote, the waiting and the worrying, and the planning for a future that Owen kept promising, was almost there. She felt something different. She felt the particular recognition of a woman who was also being deceived. Because Deanna did not know about Vivienne, she couldn't. Not and have sent those messages the way she sent them. Not and be raising 2 children on the premise of a future she believed was real. Owen had managed to keep two women in two cities, both believing they were the one he was building toward. He was simply a liar, and both of them had trusted him. Vivienne made the decision to call Deanna on a Thursday evening, 9 days after the woman had reached her by accident at the airline. She had rehearsed what she needed to say, not scripted it, just found the shape of it. Clear, not cruel, just honest. Deanna picked up on the third ring. Her voice was warm and a little cautious, the way people answer calls from unknown numbers. "Hello? My name is Vivienne Harlow," she said. "I'm Owen's wife. I know that may not be a word you expected to hear, and I'm going to ask you to give me about 10 minutes before you say anything." Silence, then very quietly, "Okay." Vivienne spoke for 12 minutes. She laid it out the same way she would explain a complicated situation to a distressed customer. Facts first, clearly sequenced, nothing embellished, nothing withheld. The conference in San Francisco. Their marriage 6 years ago. The airline call 9 days ago, the name on her screen, the plural word kids that had sent her looking, the email account, the lease, the finances, the photographs. When she finished, there was a long silence on the line. "He told me he was separated," Deanna said. Her voice was very flat, for years. "He said it was almost done. He said the divorce was complicated because of property, and he didn't want to involve lawyers if they could settle it privately. He was never separated from me," Vivienne said. "Not one day." Another long silence. "My children," Deanna said, and it was barely above a whisper. "I know. He's been here every month, I know." A pause, longer than the others. Then, "What are you going to do?" "I have a lawyer. The divorce papers are already being prepared. And I want to make sure that before anything else happens, your children have legal protection. Formal paternity, child support, everything documented. I have a family attorney I can refer you to, someone who specializes in exactly this kind of situation. That's part of why I called you first." The silence this time was different. Softer, somehow. "Why would you do that?" Vivienne thought about it for a moment. "Because you didn't know," she said simply. "And because your children didn't choose any of this." She heard Deanna exhale, a long, ragged breath. "Thank you," she said very quietly. Owen came home that Friday evening, with takeout and a comment about the traffic on I-25, and a question about whether she wanted to watch something that night. She watched him move around the kitchen, the ease of him, the way he inhabited the space they shared. And she thought about what a remarkable thing it is to watch someone perform a version of themselves that doesn't exist. She helped him unpack the takeout. She talked about work. She laughed at something he said about his flight being delayed, which it was, because she had checked and it was, and she noted that detail the same way she had noted all the others. 3 days later, she was gone. She had planned it with the same attention she brought to everything. Her important documents, her financial records, her grandmother's garnet ring that had lived in Owen's safe since their wedding because it was too valuable to wear casually. Her coffee maker, which was specific and expensive and entirely hers. Her winter running gear. 3 photographs from the bookshelf that had no meaning to anyone but her. One of her and Ray as children, one of her parents at their anniversary dinner 15 years ago, one of herself on a hiking trail in Utah the summer, before she moved to Denver, squinting into the sun. Younger and already knowing something was about to change, she left 3 things: his key to her car, which she had given him when his was in the shop 2 winters ago, and never asked for back, a printed copy of the lease agreement from Tempe, Arizona, and a note in her handwriting, 3 words: "I already know." She did not explain, she did not elaborate, she did not need to. She stayed at Francis's house for the first 2 weeks. Owen called 14 times the first day, then 30 the next. She did not answer any of them. On the 3rd day, she received a text that said, "Viv, please, I can explain everything. It's not what you think." And she read it once and put her phone face down on the table. On the 6th day, she answered. She had waited because she wanted to be completely steady when she did. "Vivienne, please," he said. "Just let me talk to you, whatever you think you found." "Owen." Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. "My lawyer has the lease agreement, 3 years of financial records, and the photographs. Deanna Marsh's attorney has been retained. I'd suggest you contact your own lawyer and have them call Harriet Oakes. That's the most useful thing you can do right now." Silence. "Her attorney," he said. "Her children are yours," Vivienne said. That needs to be handled properly. A pause that seemed to collapse in on itself. How did you, Owen, she said again, call your lawyer? She hung up. He drove to Phoenix that weekend. She knew because Francis's contact at the rental had ears, and because, honestly, she had expected it. She expected him to believe, the way people like him tend to believe, that he could still manage this, that the right words and the right expression would find some arrangement everyone could live with. Deanna let him in. She let him speak. She listened without interrupting, which Vivienne learned about later and thought was extraordinary, the kind of discipline that only comes from having already made your decision before he arrived. When he finished, Deanna told him simply that her attorney had filed for formal paternity and child support, that a guardian ad litem had been requested on behalf of Jude and Reese, and that any future contact with the children would be scheduled according to a custody arrangement a family court judge would oversee. She opened the door. He stood in her doorway with his mouth open and nothing to say, which was, by all accounts, a first. The divorce moved quickly, partly because Vivienne's lawyer was very good, and partly because Owen had nothing left to negotiate with. The financial irregularities Harriet uncovered during discovery were not small. 7 years of redirected money, some of it traceable, some of it requiring a forensic accountant who billed by the hour and found more with every hour she worked. Owen had not been stealing from their marriage exactly, but he had been careful to insulate his second life financially in ways that left marks, and Harriet followed every mark. He contested the process at first, then stopped. His lawyer eventually stopped returning Harriet's calls as quickly as he once had. By month 4 of proceedings, Owen looked like a man who had realized too late that the house he built on sand had been built on sand twice over, and that both versions were now dissolving simultaneously. His consulting firm lost 2 major clients during the proceedings when the details of the discovery filings became part of the public court record. His business partner, a methodical, reputation-conscious man named Douglas Way, dissolved their partnership in writing and with very little comment. Douglas had built his professional reputation over 20 years, and he was not interested in sharing proximity to whatever this was. Owen moved into a rental on the east side of Denver. Vivienne knew this because people talk, and because she was not avoiding information anymore, just the drama that didn't require her presence. She was, for the first time in years, sleeping deeply, not immediately. The first weeks at Francis's house, she had slept poorly, and woken tired and sat with a cup of tea in the early mornings watching the street, and feeling the particular grief of losing not a person, but a belief. She had believed in Owen. Not naively, she wasn't a naive person, but genuinely, the way you believe in something you have built carefully alongside another person over years. That belief was gone now, and grief doesn't distinguish between what deserved to survive and what didn't. It just moves through you. She let it move through her. She didn't rush it. She had always known, professionally and personally, that the worst thing to do in the middle of something difficult is pretend it isn't happening. She cried on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after she left, standing in Francis's kitchen, with the sun coming in at a low angle across the floor, for no reason she could have named, or maybe all of them at once. She let herself do that too. Then she went for a run, longer than usual, along a trail she had found the week before, up into the foothills where the city fell away, and the air was cold, and the sound was wind, and her own breathing, and nothing else. 6 months after she left, Vivienne signed a lease on an apartment in the Highlands neighborhood. 3rd floor, corner unit, windows facing east and south. She assembled her own bookshelves and hung her own curtains, and put the garnet ring in a small dish on her dresser where she could see it every morning. She transferred back to a position at Meridian that kept her in Denver full-time. She had been traveling more than she wanted to for 2 years, and it had always been a compromise she hadn't gotten around to resolving. She resolved it. She joined a running group that met Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She started cooking more seriously, which she had always meant to do and always deferred, and found it was one of those things that gave back more than it took. She talked to Ray every week, her sister, who had cried at the wedding and cried again when Vivienne told her what had happened, and who had subsequently referred to Owen exclusively as that person, in a tone that Vivienne found, over time, genuinely restorative. She was not looking for anything. She was not rebuilding towards some other version of a life she had expected. She was just living, which felt, after the last several years of living adjacent to a lie, like something close to a luxury. She was at the running group on a Thursday morning, late October, when someone new showed up and didn't know the pacing system and went out too fast and had to walk the last mile back, during which she happened to be coming in behind him and said, without thinking, "You started at a 6-something, didn't you?" He turned around. He was tall, a little breathless, with dark eyes and the look of someone who had fully expected to do better than he had done. "Is it that obvious?" "The calves," she said. "You've got speed training, but the trail's a different kind of effort." He laughed. "Noted. I'm Calloway," he said. "Raid Calloway. I just moved here from Seattle." "Vivienne Harlow," she said. "You'll like the trail better when you pace it right." He showed up the following Tuesday. He paced it right. He didn't say much on the run, which she appreciated because she didn't either. Afterward, the group usually walked 2 blocks to a place that made very good coffee, and he came along and stood slightly outside the circle the way newcomers do. And when she happened to stand near him, and the conversation broke into smaller pieces, he said, "Does it always go this direction at the end? I've run trails in Seattle for years, and nobody ever mentioned the coffee after system. It's not an official system," she said. "It's just what we do. Best kind," he said. He was an urban planner. He had taken a position with Denver's city planning office, a long-term project around transit development in the Northwest neighborhoods, the kind of work that took years and required someone willing to stay in a place long enough for it to matter. He had a patient, careful way of talking about things, like someone who had learned not to rush to the end of an idea before the middle was solid. He asked questions that were actually interested in the answers. He did not ask her anything personal for a long time, which she noticed and respected. On the 4th Thursday, he brought coffee for the group from a place she hadn't heard of. Not to make a point of it, not loudly, just there when they arrived. She caught his eye when she took hers, and he said only, "They do a better medium roast than the usual spot," which was objectively true. She started to look for him at Tuesdays. She noticed when he wasn't there, which was only twice in the first 2 months, and both times he had texted the group thread in advance, which was more than most members did. She noticed that he remembered what people said, not just to her, to everyone, the group's running goals and minor injuries and weekend plans. He was the kind of person who paid attention without making it a thing. They had their first actual conversation that wasn't incidental on a Thursday in December, when the group was smaller than usual and the coffee place was quiet. And somehow they ended up at a table in the corner without having arranged it. She had been telling the story of the worst passenger complaint she had ever received, which was genuinely funny in the way that only truly absurd workplace stories are. And he had laughed in a way that made her want to tell him more. He told her about Seattle, about his family, his older brother who ran a restaurant in Portland, and called every Sunday whether anything had happened or not, about the particular loss of leaving a city where you know the streets and the light, and which neighborhoods to walk through at night, and which to avoid, even when the leaving is something you chose. She told him about Georgia, about growing up there, about the way some part of her still measured everything against that landscape, even from 2,000 miles away. She told him about her sister Ray, who taught elementary school in Atlanta and had 3 children who called Vivienne on her birthday every year and refused to speak to her in anything but rhymes during the call because Ray's kids were structurally incapable of doing anything simple. She did not tell him about Owen. Not yet. He walked her to her car when the place closed. The December air was sharp, the city decorated and bright. He stopped at the corner before they turned separate directions. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want to say it without making it more than it is, because I think you're someone who would rather I was direct." She looked at him. "Yes. I've liked talking to you," he said. "I'd like to do it more, whenever that makes sense for you." She appreciated the phrase, "whenever that makes sense for you." Not pressure dressed up as consideration, just actually said the way it meant. "I'd like that too," she said. He smiled small and unhurried. "Okay." They started meeting on Saturdays, a trail on the south end of town that was longer and less crowded. The conversations grew in the way that conversations do when two people are genuinely curious about each other, not filling time but following threads. She learned that he had a dry, quiet sense of humor that only surfaced when he trusted the audience. She learned that he felt strongly, in the way planners apparently do, about things like setback ordinances and pedestrian crossings, which she found unexpectedly charming. He learned that she kept a running list in her head of things that were worse than people thought they were, and things that were better, and could generate examples from either category on demand. She told him about Owen on a Saturday in February. They had stopped at a point on the trail where you could see the mountains clearly, the light still early and cold, and she said, with no particular lead-in, "I should tell you something I should probably have told you before now." He said nothing, just turned slightly toward her. She told him the shape of it, the years of marriage, the phone call at the airline, what she had found, how it had ended. She told it the way she told most things, clearly, without performance. She did not need it to make her sympathetic. She was just telling him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment when she finished. The mountains sat in the distance, solid and indifferent. "That's a lot to have carried," he said. "Thank you for trusting me with it." He didn't say what she had feared some people would say, which was some version of "that must have been so hard," followed by a pivot to whatever came next. He just stayed with it for a moment, the way a person does when they understand that some things deserve more than a transition. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. Are you okay?" Not then, now. She thought about it. The apartment in the Highlands, the garnet ring in the dish on the dresser, the trail and the running group and Ray calling every week, the particular silence of a life that was entirely without compromise hers. "Yes," she said, "I actually am." He nodded. "Good." A pause. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think the thing you did for the other woman, the call, the lawyer, all of that, I think that says more about who you are than anything that happened to you." She looked at him. "It was the right thing," she said. "It was," he agreed. "But the right thing isn't always what people do." She looked back at the mountains. Something in her chest shifted. Something that had been held carefully in place for a long time, not defensively, just cautiously, and it loosened slightly, like a knot that had done its job, and could now be undone. He asked her to dinner 2 weeks later, a place she hadn't been, quiet, good food, no occasion attached to it. He stood when she came in, and it didn't feel ceremonious. It felt like something he would have done regardless, because it was. The evening was long and easy, the kind that goes faster than you mean it to. He reached across the table once to move a candle that was slightly in her eye line without making a point of it. He listened with the same quality of attention she had noticed on the trail. Not waiting for his turn, but actually there. When she told him, over the dessert neither of them had meant to order, about the running group in Memphis she had left behind, when she moved to Denver and never quite replaced, he looked at her and said, "Is that what the Tuesday-Thursday thing is fixing?" She hadn't thought of it that way. "Maybe," she said. "Partly." He smiled. "I'm glad we both needed it then." She was too. The thing about falling in love when you are past the age of believing, it will feel like it did the first time, is that it doesn't feel like falling at all. It feels like arriving. Like a place you recognize from a long way out, and you adjust your pace because you know you're almost there. And when you finally arrive, it is less like a revelation and more like a deep, unhurried relief. She kissed him for the first time in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in March, a year after she had left. They had been cooking together, something she had suggested, because she had been doing it more seriously and wanted to share it. And he was a genuinely terrible vegetable chopper, which she had not expected, and she was laughing at him for it. And then she was not laughing, and she kissed him. He set down the knife carefully. He turned. He looked at her for a long moment, like someone making sure of something important. Then he kissed her back, his hand coming up to the side of her face, slowly, like a question that already knew its answer. She had not thought she would get to have this again. Not this specifically, not the particular feeling of being held by someone who was completely, simply, there she had been wrong. Oh, they did not rush. They were both people who had learned, in different ways and for different reasons, the cost of moving faster than the foundation could support. They let the thing grow at its own pace, which was steady and real and theirs. She introduced him to Ray in April, a video call that lasted 90 minutes because Ray is constitutionally incapable of ending conversations, and Reed, to his credit, did not once look like he was hoping to escape. When the call finally ended, Ray had said, in a tone Vivienne recognized as the one her sister used when she meant something completely, "He's a good one, Viv, I can tell." Vivienne had said she thought so too. She heard from Deanna Marsh in May. A short message, not a call, just a text from a number. Vivienne had saved. Deanna had thought to send it. "I don't know if this is weird to say. But I wanted you to know that the kids and I are okay. The custody arrangement is finalized. Jude started kindergarten. I'm doing all right. I hope you are too. Thank you for what you did. I mean that." Vivienne read it twice. Then she wrote back, "Not weird at all. I'm glad you're okay. Your kids are lucky to have you." Then, after a moment, "I'm doing all right too. More than." She set her phone down on her kitchen counter. Beside the herbs she had planted in a long planter along the window, because the apartment got good light, and she had always wanted to do it, and there was no reason not to anymore. The afternoon sun was coming in at a low angle, catching the basil and the rosemary, and the glass jar where she kept her wooden spoons. Reed was picking her up in an hour. They were going to a concert in City Park, something she had bought tickets for back in February, because she'd seen the flyer and thought it looked good, and had, for the first time in a long time, made plans without wondering whether they would still make sense when the date arrived. They made sense. She knew that now. She stood at the window and looked at the city below her, the late afternoon of a Denver May, the mountains visible in the west, the streets already warm. She thought about the woman who had stood in a break room 8 months ago, staring at a parking lot, holding herself together by sheer force of habit and training, already starting to understand what she was going to have to do. That woman had been steady when she needed to be steady. She had been precise when precision was what the moment required. She had asked hard questions and sat with hard answers, and had not let any of it make her cruel or small. She had been, in every way that mattered, exactly herself, and exactly herself had turned out to be enough, and then some. She checked the time, picked up her jacket, and went to meet him.